The alarm had been screaming for 3 hours when the last engineer died. Counselor Prethik sat in her observation chamber and watched the final moments play out on the emergency feed. The Valkyrie research team had worked desperately to seal the breach in orbital platform Keth-7. Their four-armed bodies moving with trained precision, even as the toxic atmosphere leaked through the failing pressure seal. They had followed every protocol. They had done everything correctly. And one by one, they had collapsed as the poison filled their lungs. 40-7 engineers. An entire research station. Gone in less than 4 hours because a single seal had failed. Prethik turned off the feed and sat in darkness for a long moment. Her compound eyes ached from watching. Her mandibles clicked together in the Valkyrie expression of deep grief. She had known some of those engineers personally. She had approved their assignment to Keth-7 just 2 cycles ago, congratulating them on their placement at such a prestigious facility. Now she would have to write letters to their families. The emergency session of the Cosmic Engineering Council began the next morning. Representatives from 17 species gathered in the great chamber on Station Prime, their bodies filling seats designed to accommodate everything from the crystalline forms of the Ulvex to the massive bulk of the Thorn delegates. Prethik took her place at the central podium and called the session to order. "We are here to discuss the incident at orbital platform Keth-7, she announced, her voice carrying through the translation systems that allowed the diverse assembly to understand one another. 47 lives were lost due to a pressure seal failure. Engineer Primary Ulvex will present the technical analysis." The crystalline being rose from his seat, his body catching the chamber lights and scattering them in rainbow patterns across the walls. Ulvex was ancient even by galactic standards, his form grown dense and complex over thousands of years of accumulated knowledge. He was considered the finest engineering mind in 3 sectors. The pressure seal in question was a standard Model 7 configuration, Ulvex began, projecting schematics onto the chamber's central display. It was rated for 200 years of continuous operation under normal conditions. It was installed 6 years ago. All maintenance protocols were followed correctly. The failure was within acceptable statistical parameters. A murmur ran through the chamber. Prethik felt her mandibles click with unease. Within acceptable parameters. The phrase felt obscene when applied to 47 deaths. "The mathematics are clear," Ulvex continued. "No engineering system can be made perfect. A failure rate of 0.003% over the expected operational lifetime is well within tolerance. This incident, while tragic, does not indicate any flaw in our design standards." Prethik was about to respond when a voice cut through the chamber from the observer's gallery. "Where's the backup?" Every head turned toward the speaker. The human delegates sat in the far corner of the gallery, a section reserved for representatives of younger species who had not yet earned full council membership. Commander Sarah Chun was a small woman by most galactic standards, her single pair of eyes and simple bilateral symmetry marking her as a member of one of the galaxy's newest spacefaring civilizations. Humanity had achieved faster than light travel only 18 cycles ago. They were barely considered worthy of observer status. "I beg your pardon?" Ulvex's crystals chimed with confusion and mild irritation. Chun stood up from her seat. She was not supposed to speak during formal sessions. Observers were meant to observe, nothing more. But she walked down from the gallery anyway, her boots making soft sounds on the chamber floor as she approached the central display. "The backup," she repeated. "The failsafe. The secondary containment system." "Where is it?" "There is no secondary system," Ulvex replied. "The seal was rated for 200 years. Yes, I heard you. And it failed after 6. Chun reached the display and pulled up the schematics, manipulating them with surprising familiarity. "This is a single-point failure design. One component fails, and the whole system fails with it. Where's the redundancy? Redundancy would be inefficient, Ulvex explained, his tone suggesting he was speaking to a child. The mathematical models clearly demonstrate that the seal's reliability makes backup systems unnecessary. Adding redundant components would increase mass, complexity, and maintenance requirements without providing meaningful improvement in safety outcomes. 47 people are dead. Yes, and that is a tragedy. But the mathematics told you they would be safe. Chun's voice was quiet but hard. The mathematics were wrong. And because nobody planned for the mathematics being wrong, 47 engineers died in a toxic atmosphere with no backup seal. No emergency containment, no secondary life support, and no way to survive long enough for rescue to arrive. The chamber had gone very still. Prethik watched the exchange with growing interest. She had never spoken with the human delegate before. In truth, she had barely noticed her presence at previous sessions. Humans were new, their technology primitive, their understanding of galactic engineering considered quaint at best. No one had expected them to have anything useful to contribute. Chun pulled up a file from her personal datapad and projected it, alongside the Veltari schematics. The human designs looked crude by comparison, cluttered with extra components, redundant pathways, and what appeared to be an almost paranoid number of backup systems. This is a standard human pressure seal assembly, Chun said. We use them on our space stations, our ships, our habitats. They're not as elegant as yours. They're heavier, more complex, more expensive to maintain. But when one fails, and they do fail, because everything fails eventually, the backup kicks in. And when the backup fails, the tertiary system activates. And when that fails, the emergency containment protocols trigger automatically, sealing the affected section and giving the crew time to evacuate. This seems excessive, one of the Thorin delegates rumbled. It is excessive, Chun agreed. That's the point. She turned to face the full council, her small frame somehow commanding attention, despite being dwarfed by most of the beings in the room. We have a saying on Earth. Regulations are written in blood. Every safety standard we have exists because someone died without it. We don't trust the mathematics. We don't trust the materials. We don't trust the manufacturers. We don't even trust ourselves. We assume that everything will fail, because given enough time, everything does. This is a primitive approach, Ulvex observed. A species confident in its engineering does not need such measures. Maybe, Chun said. Or maybe a species confident in its engineering stops asking the most important question: what happens when we're wrong? She gestured back at the schematics of Kef 7, at the elegant, efficient design that had killed 47 people. Your seal was rated for 200 years. It failed after 6. Your engineers followed every protocol. They still died. And right now, across council space, there are thousands of other stations with the same seals, the same designs, the same assumption that the mathematics will protect them. She paused. How many more people have to die before you start planning for failure? The chamber erupted in noise. Delegates shouted objections, demanded the human be removed, called her words an insult to galactic engineering tradition. But Prethik remained silent, her compound eyes fixed on the human schematics still displayed on the central screen. She traced the emergency pathways with her gaze. Primary seal, secondary seal, tertiary containment, automatic emergency protocols, manual overrides accessible even in complete darkness. Every component designed not for efficiency, but for survival. Not for optimal performance, but for worst-case scenarios. It was inelegant. It was wasteful. It was, by every standard of galactic engineering, primitive and excessive. But as Prethik looked at those redundant systems, she found herself thinking about the 47 letters she would have to write. She thought about the families who would never see their loved ones again. She thought about the last desperate hours on Keth 7, when trained engineers had fought against a failure they had no backup for, no contingency for, no hope of surviving. And she wondered, for the first time in her long career, whether the mathematics had been protecting them at all or simply hiding the cost of their confidence until it came due. The session ended in chaos, with no resolution reached. Chen was formally reprimanded for speaking out of turn and reminded that observers did not have the right to address the council directly. The incident at Keth 7 was classified as a statistical anomaly, and the matter was officially closed. But Prethik did not forget. And in the weeks that followed, she began to quietly study human engineering practices, searching for something she had never thought to look for, a way to plan for failure. The proposal reached the full council 6 months after the Keth 7 incident. Councilor Prethik had spent those months gathering data, consulting with human engineers, and preparing arguments she knew would be rejected. She submitted the document anyway, because 47 names still haunted her sleep, and she could no longer pretend the mathematics would protect anyone. The response was immediate and hostile. The Cathal collective called human engineering paranoid, primitivism unsuited for advanced civilizations. The crystal and the cord dismissed. The proposal has the nervous tinkering of a species too, young to understand proper risk assessment. The hegemony of Yul calculated. The resource cost of implementing redundant systems across council space and declared it economically absurd. The Tharan delegates simply laughed, their deep rumbling filling the chamber like distant thunder. Only the human delegation remained silent. Commander Chun sat in the observer's gallery with her small team, watching the proceedings with an expression Prethik could not quite read. The human had been formally warned not to speak again. Her presence at the session was barely tolerated. Engineer Primary Yulvex led the opposition. His crystalline form blazed with reflected light as he addressed the council, his voice carrying the weight of thousands of years of engineering tradition. The proposal before us would require fundamental changes to every system, every station, every vessel under council jurisdiction, he declared. It would add mass to our ships, complexity to our designs, and maintenance burdens to our crews. And for what? To address a statistical anomaly that falls well within acceptable parameters? Acceptable parameters killed 47 people, Prethik replied. And implementing these changes would cost trillions in resources that could be better spent elsewhere. How many people would die because we diverted those resources from medical research, from agricultural development, from colonial expansion? Yulvex's S crystals chimed with cold logic. Mathematics demands we consider the full picture, Counselor. A single tragic incident does not justify abandoning engineering principles that have served the Council for millennia. The chamber murmured in agreement. Prethik felt her momentum slipping away. She had known this would happen. The Council was old, set in its ways, confident in systems that had worked well enough for longer than humanity had existed as a species. Changing minds would take more than statistics and arguments. It would take blood. The proposal was tabled, pending further review, which everyone understood meant it would never be seen again. Prethik accepted the defeat with what grace she could manage and returned to her regular duties. Chun and her team departed Station Prime the following week, their observer status unchanged, their voices unheard. 14 months later, the eternal calculation vanished. The eternal calculation was the pride of the Crystalline Accord. It was a deep space research vessel, the largest and most advanced ever constructed, carrying 300 of the finest scientific minds in the galaxy toward the radiation anomalies at the galaxy's edge. Its engineering was considered flawless. Its safety record was perfect. Every system had been designed to the highest standards of Council engineering. Elegant and efficient and mathematically optimal. It disappeared without sending a distress signal. The search lasted for weeks. Ships from 12 species combed the region where the eternal calculation had last been detected, scanning for any trace of the massive vessel. They found nothing but empty void and the cold light of distant stars. The crystalline accord fell into mourning. The council held memorial services. 300 brilliant scientists were declared lost. Their work and their lives ended by unknown causes in the darkness between galaxies. Then a salvage vessel found the wreckage. The eternal calculation had been torn apart from the inside. Emergency analysis revealed the cause within hours. A power regulator in the main reactor had failed. It was a standard component, rated for 1,000 years of continuous operation under normal conditions. It had lasted 20 years. When it failed, the resulting power surge had cascaded through the ship's systems, overwhelming the reactor containment and triggering a catastrophic explosion. There had been no backup power regulator. The mathematics had said one was unnecessary. There had been no secondary containment system. The design had been optimized for efficiency. There had been no time to react, no way to stop the cascade, no chance for any of the 300 people on board to survive. The explosion had been instantaneous and complete. The emergency session that followed was the quietest in council history. Representatives from 17 species sat in their seats and stared at the wreckage analysis without speaking. Ulvex's crystalline form had gone dark, his light dimmed by grief and something else that Prethik recognized after a moment. It was doubt. For the first time in millennia, the engineer primary was doubting his own mathematics. Commander Chen was not present. She had not been invited. But Prethik had arranged for a data link to the human delegation's ship, and she knew Chen was watching. The failure was within acceptable parameters, someone finally said. The words fell flat in the silent chamber. 300 people are dead, Prethik replied. The finest minds in the crystalline accord. Gone in an instant because a component rated for 1,000 years failed after 20. And nobody planned for that possibility. We cannot plan for every possibility, Ulvex said. But his voice lacked its usual confidence. The mathematics failed them. Just like they failed the engineers on Keth 7. Prethik rose from her seat and walked to the central display. She pulled up the human engineering files she had been studying for over a year. 80 months ago, a human observer asked us a question we could not answer. What happens when we are wrong? We dismissed her. We called her species primitive. We told ourselves our engineering was too advanced to need the crude redundancies humans rely on. She displayed the human reactor designs alongside the elegant crystalline schematics. The human versions were cluttered with backup systems, emergency containment, automatic shutdown protocols, manual overrides. This is what they do instead of trusting mathematics, Prethik said. They assume the mathematics will be wrong. They assume the components will fail. They assume everything will go wrong, and they build systems that survive anyway. Not because they are primitive, but because they learned something we never had to learn. And what is that? Asked the Thorin delegate. That overconfidence kills. Prethik turned to face the council. Commander Chen told us that human safety regulations are written in blood. Every standard they have exists because someone died without it. They did not develop these practices because they wanted to. They developed them because their people kept dying until they did. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the chamber. We have always believed ourselves too advanced to need such measures. We trusted our mathematics, our materials, our engineering traditions. And that trust has now cost us 347 lives in less than 2 years. How many more will it cost before we admit that we were wrong? The debate that followed lasted for weeks. Delegates argued about costs, about efficiency, about the fundamental principles of galactic engineering. But something had changed. The loss of the eternal calculation had shaken the Council in ways that Keth-7 alone had not. 300 deaths could not be dismissed as a statistical anomaly. 300 of the galaxy's best scientists could not be written off as acceptable parameters. Slowly, reluctantly, the Council began to listen. Prethik arranged for Commander Chun to address the full assembly. This time, there were no objections. The human stood at the central podium, small and fragile-looking among the vast alien forms surrounding her, and she spoke about Earth's history. She told them about industrial accidents, about nuclear disasters, about spacecraft that had burned up or exploded or simply failed in ways no one had predicted. She told them about the investigations that followed each tragedy, the regulations that emerged, the slow, painful process of learning to plan for failure. "We paid for these lessons in blood," Chun said. "Every standard I'm proposing to you represents someone's death. Workers who fell from scaffolds before we required safety harnesses. Engineers who died in fires before we required emergency exits. Astronauts who suffocated in spacecraft before we required backup life support." She met the eyes of the delegates around her. "I am offering you these lessons freely. You do not have to pay the price we paid. You just have to be willing to learn from our mistakes instead of making your own." The vote came 3 days later. It was not unanimous. It was not even close to unanimous. But it passed, by a margin that surprised everyone, including Prethik. The Cosmic Engineering Council formally adopted human safety standards, effective immediately across all Council space. They called it the Chun Protocol, despite the commander's objections. "It's not about me," Chun insisted during the ratification ceremony. "Name it after the people who died to create these standards. Name it after Keth-7 and the eternal calculation. Name it after everyone we are trying to protect." But the name stuck anyway, and soon it would spread across the galaxy, changing everything it touched. The changes came slowly at first. Implementing the Chun Protocol across Council space was an enormous undertaking, requiring modifications to millions of systems on thousands of stations and vessels. Engineers who had spent their entire careers trusting mathematical models now had to learn to plan for those models being wrong. It was not an easy transition. The Velthari complained about the added mass on their graceful ships. Every backup system, every redundant component, every emergency failsafe added weight that their elegant designs had never needed to account for. Ship performance decreased. Fuel consumption increased. The mathematics that had governed their engineering for millennia had to be recalculated from scratch. The crystalline accord objected to the aesthetic disruption. Their designs had always been beautiful, every component serving a precise purpose, every system elegant and efficient. Now backup panels and emergency overrides cluttered their pristine surfaces. Warning indicators blinked in places where smooth crystal had once caught the light. It felt, to many of them, like vandalism. The hegemony of Yule calculated the resource cost and found it staggering. Trillions in materials, billions of labor hours. An entire generation of engineers were trained. They implemented the protocols because the Council had voted to require them, but they did so with barely concealed resentment. And yet, slowly, the death stopped. Not entirely. Nothing could prevent every accident, every failure, every moment when the universe reminded sentient beings that they were small and fragile in a vast and uncaring cosmos. But the catastrophic losses, the cascading failures, the incidents where dozens or hundreds died because a single component failed, those became rare. Then rarer still. Then almost unheard of. Prethik watched the transformation unfold over years, then decades. She was old by Velthari standards, her compound eyes growing dim, her mandibles clicking more slowly than they once had. But she lived long enough to see the Chun Protocol become simply the way things were done. The first generation of engineers trained under the new standards did not remember a time before redundant systems. They did not remember when a single seal failure could kill an entire station, when a power regulator malfunction could destroy a ship, when 47 or 300 people could die because nobody had asked, "What if we are wrong?" They grew up assuming that backup systems were normal, that emergency fail-safes were obvious, that planning for failure was simply good engineering. They asked, "What if this component fails?" Before they asked, "How efficient can we make this?" They designed systems that could survive their own malfunctions. They built vessels that brought their crews home even when everything went wrong. On the 50th anniversary of the Keth 7 incident, a memorial was unveiled on the rebuilt station. The original platform had been completely reconstructed, its systems upgraded to Chun protocol standards, its population now protected by the redundant systems that had been dismissed as unnecessary half a century before. The memorial was a wall of crystalline alloy, etched with 47 names in scripts from 12 different worlds. Councillor Prethix stood before the wall in silence. She was very old now, moving slowly, supported by a young aide who guided her steps with gentle hands. Her vision was failing, but she could still make out the names. She had written letters to each of their families 50 years ago. She had never forgotten them. Commander Chun stood beside her. The human was old too, her hair white, her face lined with decades of life. She had risen to admiral in the Earth Fleet, then retired to spend her final years as an ambassador to the Council. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached out to touch the crystalline surface. "I used to think your species was too young to teach us anything," Prethix said quietly. "I believed our engineering was too advanced, our mathematics too sophisticated, our traditions too refined to need lessons from a civilization that had barely reached the stars. I was wrong." Chun smiled, but there was sadness in it. "We did not teach you anything you could not have figured out yourselves. We just paid for the lessons first. And you offered them freely, because nobody should have to learn this way if they do not have to." Chun gestured at the memorial, at the station bustling with life around them, at the ships visible through the observation window ships that would bring their crews home, because someone had thought to ask what would happen if everything went wrong. Every name on this wall represents a failure. Every safety standard exists because someone died without it. That is the price of learning the hard way. Prethix clicked her mandible softly, a Valkyrie gesture of profound respect that humans had learned to recognize over the decades. "We have adopted your lessons. We have implemented your protocols. But I wonder sometimes if we have truly understood them." "What do you mean?" "You told us that regulations are written in blood. We heard the words, but I am not sure we felt them. To us, the Chun Protocol is a set of engineering standards, a technical requirement, a mathematical framework for redundancy." She turned to face the human, her failing eyes still bright with intelligence. "But to you, it is something more, is it not?" Chun was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was rough with old grief. "When I was young, I worked on a construction platform in Earth orbit. Standard station, standard crew, standard equipment. One day, a support beam failed during maintenance. 3 workers fell. 2 of them were caught by the safety systems, harnesses, nets, emergency protocols. 1 of them was not. He fell into the void, and we could not reach him in time." She paused, her hand still resting on the memorial wall. "His name was James. He was 23 years old. He had a daughter he had never met because she was born while he was on assignment. The investigation found that a safety harness had been improperly secured. The regulations were updated within a month. Every harness on every station was redesigned. And James's daughter grew up without a father because someone had not asked what would happen if the harness failed." Prethix said nothing. There was nothing to say. That is what we mean when we say regulations are written in blood, Chun continued. Every standard, every protocol, every safety measure represents someone's child, someone's parents, someone's friend. We do not plan for failure because we are primitive or paranoid. We plan for failure because we have learned, over and over again, that failure comes for everyone eventually. And when it comes, the only thing that matters is whether you were ready for it. She turned to face Prethik, her old eyes meeting the Velthary's compound gaze. You asked if you have truly understood our lessons. I think the answer is yes, but not because you implemented the protocols. You understand because you felt the weight of those 47 names. You understand because you wrote letters to their families and could not sleep for months afterward. You understand because you fought for changes that your own people called unnecessary, and you did it anyway because you knew it was right. Prethik felt something shift in her heart. She had spent 50 years wondering if she had done enough, if she had truly understood what humans meant when they talked about learning from tragedy. Now, standing before the memorial to the engineers she had failed to protect, she finally understood. The Chem Protocol was not about mathematics. It was not about redundancy or efficiency or engineering principles. It was about love. Love for the people who would use these systems. Love for the families who wanted their loved ones to come home. Love for the future generations who would never have to learn these lessons the hard way because someone had cared enough to teach them first. Thank you, Prethik said softly, for the gift of your lessons, for the blood your people paid to learn them, for offering them to us freely, even when we did not deserve your generosity. Chun shook her head. Everyone deserves the chance to learn from someone else's mistakes. That is how civilizations grow. That is how we become better than we were. She looked up at the stars visible through the observation window, at the ships moving through the void, at the vast galaxy that held more dangers than any species could ever predict. The universe does not care about us, Chun said. It does not care about our mathematics or our engineering or our traditions. It will find our weaknesses and exploit them sooner or later. The only question is whether we are ready when it does. She smiled, old and tired but still somehow hopeful. Thanks to you, counselor, a lot more people are going to make it home to their families. And that is worth every regulation, every redundant system, every extra kilogram of backup equipment we had to install. Prethik nodded slowly. Around them, the station hummed with life researchers and engineers and families, all protected by systems designed to fail gracefully, to give them time, to bring them home. Above them, ships moved through the darkness, carrying crews who would survive accidents that would have killed their predecessors, returning to ports that would welcome them back because someone had asked, "What if we are wrong?" The universe was vast and dangerous and utterly indifferent to the small creatures that dared to travel through it. But those small creatures had learned, slowly and painfully, and at terrible cost, to protect each other. They had learned to plan for failure. They had learned that every life was worth protecting, even if the mathematics said the risk was acceptable.